The first thing I noticed was the sound machines breathing for my son when I couldn't. The second was my phone lighting up in my palm, vibrating insistently as if it didn't care where I was or what was happening. I thought it would be my wife asking for an update, maybe reminding me to bring Ethan's hoodie. Instead, a few sentences cracked open my life with surgical precision. Not shouted, not dramatic, just typed. In that fluorescent ER hallway, with my 6-year-old on a gurney and my signature half written on a clipboard, I learned how quietly everything can be taken from you. The emergency room smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. That sterile mix always makes time feel thicker, slower, like every second has weight. Ethan lay on the narrow bed, his small arm taped with an IV cartoon dinosaurs, roaring silently on a ceiling-mounted screen meant to distract kids from pain. His hair was matted with sweat curls sticking to his forehead, the way they did when he had a fever. He looked at me with that particular kind of trust only children have, the belief that whatever is happening, the adult holding their hand will fix it. "Dad," he whispered, voice raspy, "is Mom coming?" I squeezed his fingers, careful not to disturb the tubing. "She's busy right now, buddy, but I'm here." That was true at least. I was here. I had been the one to rush him in after he collapsed at soccer practice, pale and dizzy. The coach yelling for water while I scooped him up and drove like the red lights didn't exist. The doctor had said it wasn't life-threatening dehydration, maybe a minor infection, but they wanted to run tests. ER language for wait and see. A nurse handed me a clipboard. "Just sign here, Mr. Carter." I leaned against the wall and wrote my name, Michael Carter. Halfway through the last letter, my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it, almost. Rachel's name glowed on the screen. For a brief, foolish moment, relief washed over me. She's checking in, I thought. She's finally turned around from whatever meeting she said she couldn't leave. I opened the message. "I'm moving to Miami with him. I took all our savings. You're on your own." 3 sentences, no greeting, no apology, no explanation. My pen slipped, dragging a crooked line across the form. My brain refused to process the words in the order they were written. Miami, him, savings, on your own. Dad Ethan tugged at my sleeve, his brow furrowed. "Did they say when I can go home?" I looked at him and forced my face into something that resembled calm. Years of troubleshooting, server crashes, and late-night system failures had trained me to keep my voice steady under pressure. I didn't know then how useful that skill would become. "Soon," I said. "They just want to make sure you're okay." The nurse took the clipboard back, oblivious to the fact that my hands were shaking. I stepped a few feet away toward the window overlooking the parking lot and read the message again. Same words, same meaning. No hidden nuance waiting to reveal itself. Rachel was my wife of 11 years, the woman who color-coded our calendars and reminded me to schedule dentist appointments. The woman who insisted on joint accounts because transparency builds trust. The woman who kissed Ethan's forehead every morning before school. And now she was moving to Miami. With him, a pronoun so casual it felt like a slap. I typed a response without thinking too much because thinking felt dangerous. "Good luck." 2 words, that was all. I hit send before I could reconsider. The bubble disappeared, message delivered. I expected something to happen then, anger maybe, or a wave of nausea. Instead, there was just a strange, hollow quiet, as if someone had turned the volume down on the world. The beeping monitors faded into background noise. The ER became a movie set I was standing in, detached, watching myself from a distance. Michael, a doctor, approached, flipping through a chart. "We're going to keep Ethan for observation a little longer." "Of course," I said automatically. Ethan's eyes drifted closed, exhaustion winning. I sat back down beside him, one hand on his chest, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. I focused on that rhythm because it was something real, something still mine. My phone buzzed again, not Rachel, a bank alert. "Transfer completed." I didn't open it. Not yet. I didn't need to. The words from her text echoed in my head, each one settling into place like a final verdict. I tried to remember the last time things felt normal. That morning, maybe. Rachel had left early, muttering something about traffic and a breakfast meeting. She hadn't kissed me goodbye, but that wasn't unusual lately. We'd been distant, busy. That's what couples our age called it when they didn't want to say the other word. Miami. The thought felt surreal. Sunlight, palm trees, ocean air, things that belong to vacation brochures, not to the woman who argued with me about grocery budgets and school zones. And him. I didn't know who him was yet, but I could already picture the type confident, reckless someone who saw my life as an upgrade opportunity. Dad, Ethan murmured, half asleep. Can we still go camping this weekend? The question pierced straight through the fog. Yeah, I said, swallowing hard. We'll see how you feel, but we'll figure something out. Because that was what fathers did. They figured things out even when the ground shifted under their feet. I checked the time. Rent was due in a week. School tuition at the end of the month. Utilities, groceries, insurance numbers that had always balanced neatly in a spreadsheet Rachel maintained. Numbers I suddenly realized I didn't fully know by heart. Another message came through. Not from Rachel, from her mother, Diane. Rachel says you've been controlling lately. I hope you'll give her space. I stared at the screen, a cold understanding forming. This wasn't impulsive. This was coordinated. Conversations had happened without me. Stories had been told. In the ER hallway with my son sleeping and my life quietly unraveling, I understood something fundamental. Whatever Rachel had gone to Miami for, she hadn't just left. She had prepared. I slid my phone into my pocket and leaned closer to Ethan, brushing his hair back gently. The monitor continued its steady beep. Alive. Here. That mattered. Outside, an ambulance screamed into the nightlights, flashing red against the glass. Somewhere between those lights and the hum of the machines, a line was being drawn between the life I thought I had and the one I was about to be forced to build. And when she arrived in Miami, she believed she was free. She had no idea what she'd set in motion. The hospital discharged Ethan just after midnight. The doctor's voice was reassuring, practiced. Dehydration likely compounded by a mild infection. He'll be fine with rest and fluids. I thanked him, nodded at the nurse, gathered the paperwork. Ethan slept against my shoulder as I carried him to the car, his weight familiar and grounding. Outside, the air was cool, the parking lot washed in sodium lights. Normal, almost peaceful. I buckled him into the back seat, adjusted the straps with the same care I always used, then sat behind the wheel, and finally allowed myself to open the bank alert. Transfer completed, $184,612.37. My thumb hovered, then scrolled. Available balance, $0. For a moment, I thought it had to be a glitch, a delayed refresh, something technical I could explain away if I dug deep enough. That's how my brain worked, systems, logic, solvable errors. But the app refreshed again, obediently, mercilessly. Zero stayed zero. I started the car and drove home slowly, Ethan breathing softly behind me. Every red light felt longer than the last. At one intersection, a group of college kids laughed as they crossed the street, carefree, loud. I watched them through the windshield and felt strangely old. At home, I carried Ethan inside and tucked him into bed, placing a glass of water on his nightstand and lining up the medicine bottles the nurse had given me. He stirred once, eyes half opening. Dad. I'm here, I said. Go to sleep. When his breathing evened out again, I closed the door and stood in the hallway, staring at the family photos lining the wall. Beach trip, birthday cake, Rachel's arm around my waist, smiling like we had a shared secret. I wondered how many of those smiles were rehearsed. I went to the kitchen and opened my laptop. If there was one thing panic couldn't survive, it was data. Checking account next, $412.89. Credit card balances. Mortgage auto draft scheduled in 10 days. School tuition invoice flagged as upcoming. I pulled up the retirement portal, my 401k. A withdrawal notification blinked at the top of the screen. Rachel hadn't been able to take everything, not without penalties, but she'd taken the maximum allowable portion. She knew exactly what she was doing. I leaned back in the chair, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly too loud. Rachel had always handled the finances. You're better with systems, she'd say, tapping my laptop. I'm better with money. I'd believed her, trusted her. Trust, I was learning, was a liability if it wasn't shared equally. My phone rang. Diane. I considered letting it go to voicemail. Instead, I answered. Michael, she said sharply, no greeting. What have you done? Hello, Diane, I replied, keeping my voice level. Rachel is distraught, she continued. She says you've been emotionally volatile, that she felt unsafe staying in the house. Unsafe, the word landed with intention. That's not true, I said. She texted me tonight. She left. Because you pushed her, Diane snapped. You've always been controlling. I warned her about marrying you. I closed my eyes. This wasn't a conversation. It was a performance. Lines memorized, cues followed. She emptied our accounts, I said. All of them. A pause, brief but telling. Rachel needed resources to protect herself, Diane replied carefully. You make good money, you'll recover. I looked around the kitchen, the chipped mug. Rachel refused to throw out the grocery list on the fridge, written in her neat handwriting. You knew, I said quietly. Another pause, longer this time. I know, my daughter, Diane said, and I know what men are capable of when they feel cornered. The accusation hung between us, ugly and deliberate. Good night, Diane, I said, and ended the call before she could respond. My hands were cold. I wrapped them around my mug, though I hadn't poured anything into it. The realization settled in slowly but firmly. Rachel hadn't just left with money. She'd left me a story already in circulation, one where I was unstable, unreliable, possibly dangerous. A story that explained her actions before anyone asked questions. I opened my email. Among the unread messages was one from a law firm I didn't recognize. Subject: notice of filing, Carter versus Carter. My chest tightened. The email was brief, clinical. Rachel had filed for divorce earlier that week, citing irreconcilable differences. Temporary orders requested. Custody arrangement pending review. Earlier that week, while I was coaching Ethan's soccer practice, while I was fixing the neighbor's router, while I was making dinner and assuming the distance between us was something we could talk through when things slowed down, I scrolled further. Another message, this one from Rachel, timestamped 20 minutes earlier. We'll communicate through lawyers from now on. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. Harder. I typed, deleted, typed again. Then I stopped. Words felt inadequate, and worse, they felt like they could be used against me. I locked the phone and placed it face down on the counter. I slept on the couch that night, if what I did could be called sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, numbers floated behind my eyelids. Balances, due dates, the math of survival recalculating itself in real time. Morning came too quickly. I made Ethan oatmeal, sat across from him as he ate, his cheeks flushed but his eyes brighter. Can I go to school, he asked. Not today, I said. You're resting with me. He nodded, satisfied. Children accept answers, adults agonize over. After breakfast, while he watched cartoons, I called the bank. The representative was polite, apologetic, useless. Joint account, authorized user, no fraud. I thanked her anyway. Manners were muscle memory. Next, I called a lawyer, then another. By noon, I had an appointment for the following afternoon. At 2:17 p.m., another message from Diane arrived, this time in writing. Rachel says you're refusing to cooperate. That won't look good for you. I read it twice, then archived it. Evidence, I realized. Everything from now on was evidence. That afternoon, I sat on the floor with Ethan, assembling a puzzle he'd been saving. A picture of a lighthouse standing against crashing waves. As we worked piece by piece, I felt something shift. Not resolve, not hope exactly, but clarity. Rachel believed she had removed herself cleanly, financially insulated, legally framed. She believed I would be too stunned, too busy scrambling to respond coherently. She had mistaken shock for surrender. By the time Ethan fell asleep again, curled up against my side, I had a legal pad filled with notes, dates, transactions, names. The money was gone, but the story was just beginning. I used to believe you could understand a marriage by looking at its milestones. The day you met, the day you married, the day your child was born. Like beads on a string, evenly spaced, easy to count. But sitting at the kitchen table with a legal pad full of dates and dollar amounts, I realized how misleading that idea was. The real story lived in the quiet spaces between those moments, in the habits you stop questioning, the compromises that feel small at the time, the assumptions that harden into truth without ever being tested. Rachel and I met in our early 30s at a professional networking event neither of us had wanted to attend. I was there for the free drinks and the hope of overhearing something useful. She was there because her boss insisted. She laughed easily, asked thoughtful questions, and spoke with the kind of confidence that made you lean in instead of compete. We were older than most couples when we married, already tired of games, or so we told ourselves. We like to say we chose each other deliberately. In the beginning, we divided life the way practical people do. I handled technology, logistics, anything with a system. Rachel handled finances, planning the long view. It felt efficient, mature. When she suggested combining all our accounts, she framed it as a symbol of trust. No secrets, she said, smiling as she slid the paperwork across the table. I signed without hesitation. The first years were good. Not perfect, but solid. We bought our house after careful debate about school districts and commute times. When Ethan was born, Rachel took a brief maternity leave, then returned to work with renewed focus. I shifted to a more flexible schedule so I could handle pickups and doctor appointments. We congratulated ourselves on being modern balanced. Looking back, I can see where the tone changed, though. At the time, it felt gradual enough to ignore. Rachel started asking more questions about my work, not out of interest, but evaluation. Are you sure this contract is stable? Have you thought about management instead of technical work? They sounded like concerns, so I accepted them as such. Her mother, Diane, became more present around the same time. She had always been opinionated, but now her comments carried weight. Rachel shouldn't have to worry about money, she'd say, glancing pointedly at me. Stress isn't good for a growing family. Rachel never contradicted her. She didn't have to. Silence did the work for her. When Rachel proposed that she take full control of our investments, I agreed. She had a background in finance. I trusted her. That trust was reinforced by small, reasonable explanations whenever something didn't quite add up. A delayed statement, a reallocated fund. It's complicated, she'd say, and I believed her, because believing was easier than admitting I didn't understand the rules of a game I was playing. Lucas entered our lives as a name before he became a presence, a colleague, a brilliant strategist, someone who really understood the market. Rachel spoke about him with professional admiration, the same way she spoke about mentors and clients. When I finally met him at a company event, he was exactly what I expected. Charming, articulate, effortlessly confident. He shook my hand firmly, looked me in the eye. You're lucky, he said, nodding toward Rachel. She's impressive. At the time, I felt proud. The shifts at home were subtle. Rachel traveled more. Dinners were rescheduled. Conversations shortened. When I mentioned feeling disconnected, she accused me of being needy. We're adults, she said. This is what ambition looks like. I didn't want to be the kind of man threatened by his wife's success, so I swallowed my discomfort and tried harder. Ethan adored her. That alone should have been enough to keep us anchored. She read to him when she was home, helped with homework, kissed him goodnight. If there were nights she missed bedtime, she always had a reason. A call ran late, a client crisis. I accepted them all. The first real argument about money came 2 years ago, after I noticed a sizable transfer I didn't recognize. Rachel explained it as a temporary repositioning. It'll be back, she said. Trust me. When I asked for more details, her expression hardened. Do you trust me or not, she asked. I said yes. After that, I stopped asking. What I didn't see then was how carefully the narrative was being shaped. Diane's comments about my emotional intensity, Rachel's casual jokes about me being bad with finances, the way she framed decisions as protective rather than controlling. Piece by piece, an image was being built, one where I was well-meaning, but unstable, involved, but unreliable. The night before she left, we sat on opposite ends of the couch, Ethan asleep upstairs. She told me she needed space, that she felt suffocated. I suggested counseling. She smiled sadly like I'd missed the point. You wouldn't understand, she said. I believed her. Now with hindsight sharpened by betrayal, I could see the pattern clearly. The preparation, the documentation, the way each choice positioned her as the rational actor and me as the problem. I closed the legal pad and looked around the living room. The furniture was still here. The walls still held our photos. But the marriage I thought I had, the partnership, the mutual trust had been gone long before Miami entered the picture. Rachel hadn't just left me. She'd left behind a version of me she was ready to use. The law office sat above a bakery on a quiet side street, the kind of place you'd never notice unless you were looking for it. The smell of bread followed me up the narrow staircase, warm and ordinary, completely at odds with the reason I was there. I arrived 10 minutes early and used the time to steady my breathing. If Rachel had already framed me as unstable, I couldn't afford to look anything but composed. Helen Brooks opened the door herself. She was in her early 50s, silver streaks in her dark hair, glasses perched low on her nose. Her handshake was firm, practiced. Michael Carter, she said. Come in. Her office was modest, no leather chairs, No intimidating diplomas on the wall. Just order. Files stacked neatly, a desk cleared except for a yellow legal pad and a pen aligned precisely with its edge. It struck me that this more than anything was what I needed: someone who respected structure. I've reviewed the initial filing, Helen said once we were seated. Your wife didn't waste time. I nodded. Neither did her lawyer. Helen slid a copy of the petition across the desk. I had read it already, but seeing it again made my stomach tighten. Irreconcilable differences. Temporary sole physical custody requested. Concerns regarding the husband's emotional volatility. Volatility, another word carefully chosen. She filed 10 days ago, Helen continued. Before she left the state. Miami, I said. Helen raised an eyebrow. She disclosed Florida as her intended residence, yes, along with a request to establish jurisdiction there. The implications landed hard. She's trying to move the case. She's trying to move you, Helen corrected. Away from your home court, away from familiarity, away from any advantage. I leaned back, forcing myself to absorb the information rather than react to it. What about the money? Helen flipped to another page. Joint accounts. Legally accessible to either party. Unethical, yes, but not criminal, not yet. Not yet, I held on to that. She also claims, Helen added, tapping the paper, that you've been financially dependent on her. I almost laughed. Almost. That's not true. Truth and documentation aren't always aligned at first, Helen said calmly. We fixed that. She asked questions, precise, methodical. Employment history, income streams, parenting routines. I answered honestly, resisting the urge to over-explain. When she asked about my mental health, I paused. I've never been diagnosed with anything, I said. No treatment, no incidents. Anyone could say that, Helen replied. What matters is what exists on paper. That was when she asked about Diane. Your mother-in-law, she said. How involved is she? In everything I said before, I could stop myself. Helen nodded slowly. That's what I thought. She opened a new folder and slid it toward me. Inside were copies of emails Rachel's lawyer had submitted, statements from Diane describing me as erratic, prone to emotional outbursts, unpredictable under stress. Each sentence felt like a nail hammered in by someone who had watched me for years, collecting moments to weaponize. She's positioning herself as a concerned grandmother, Helen said. Very effective, especially if the other parent is already out of state. My jaw tightened. So what do? We slow this down, Helen said, and we gather. Over the next hour, she explained the terrain. Emergency motions, temporary orders, jurisdictional challenges. She spoke in measured tones, translating legal complexity into manageable steps. It was the first time since the ER that I felt something like control return. There's something else, Helen said near the end of the meeting. Your wife's financial disclosures are incomplete. I leaned forward. In what way? She lists the joint accounts she accessed, Helen said, but she omits any mention of a trust. A trust, the word was unfamiliar in this context. Helen turned her screen toward me. Your mother-in-law is listed as trustee on a family trust established 5 years ago. Rachel is a beneficiary. 5 years ago, around the time Rachel insisted on consolidating our finances. Around the time Diane started talking about protecting assets. There are distributions from that trust, Helen continued. Significant ones, not disclosed in the filing. Can she do that? I asked. She can try, Helen said. But omission is a problem, especially if those funds were used to support your household. My pulse quickened. So there's more money. There's more structure, Helen corrected, and structure leaves traces. As I left the office, the smell of bread hit me again. Life going on unbothered by my personal catastrophe. I sat in my car and didn't start the engine right away. Instead, I opened my email and began searching. Keywords, dates, names. At home, while Ethan napped on the couch beside me, I dug deeper. Old statements, archived folders. It was slow, painstaking work, but patterns began to emerge. Transfers that aligned too neatly. Deposits labeled as gifts. Rachel's financial world, once opaque, started to show seams. Late that evening, my phone rang. Rachel. I stared at the screen until it stopped. A minute later, a text appeared. We need to talk. This doesn't have to get ugly. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the message to Helen. Her reply came quickly. Good, keep everything, say nothing. The next morning, an email arrived from Rachel's lawyer requesting an expedited custody hearing. Urgent, necessary, framed as concern for Ethan's well-being. I read it twice, then opened a new document and began organizing what I had found. Every transfer, every email, every inconsistency. By the time Ethan woke up, I had a folder labeled Simply Evidence. That afternoon, Helen called. "We're filing our response," she said. "Emergency orders. To freeze assets. To establish jurisdiction here." "And Rachel?" I asked. "She'll fight," Helen said. "She's invested too much not to." I looked at the sleeping form of my son, his chest rising and falling steadily. The law I was learning wasn't about dramatic gestures. It was about patience, about letting the other side reveal itself. Rachel had laid a trap carefully baited with money and distance and narrative. She assumed I would stumble into it. She underestimated how well I could learn the rules once I knew the game was real. There is a particular kind of fear that arrives once the initial shock wears off. It's quieter than panic, more deliberate. It doesn't scream. It sits beside you, taps its fingers, and asks practical questions. How long can you last? What happens if you lose? What will this cost your child? That was the fear that settled in with me during the days that followed my meeting with Helen. And strangely, it was that fear, not anger, that sharpened my focus. I stopped reacting. Instead, I started documenting. Every morning after dropping Ethan at school, I sat at the dining table with my laptop and a legal pad. I recreated timelines the way I would map out a failing system at work. Inputs, outputs, anomalies. Rachel's movements began to look less like a series of personal choices and more like a workflow designed for a specific outcome. Helen had warned me not to confront Rachel directly. "Let her talk," she said. "People reveal more when they think you're not listening." So when Rachel texted again, "Have you found a lawyer yet?" I didn't reply. When Diane emailed a long, carefully worded message about Ethan's need for stability and the importance of cooperation, I archived it without response. Silence, I was learning, was not weakness. It was space. One afternoon, while reviewing old bank statements, I noticed something I'd missed before. Small, regular transfers from our joint account to an LLC I didn't recognize. The amounts were modest enough to avoid attention, but consistent. I searched the name. Registered in Florida. Owned by Lucas Monroe. My stomach tightened, but I didn't let myself spiral. I took screenshots, saved copies, noted dates. When I sent the information to Helen, her reply was immediate. "Good catch. This matters." That night after Ethan went to bed, I opened the filing cabinet in Rachel's old home office. It felt invasive, but necessity has a way of overriding etiquette. Inside were neatly labeled folders, tax returns, insurance documents, property records. Rachel loved organization. It was one of the things I'd admired about her. In a folder marked miscellaneous, I found a printed email chain. The subject line read Trust Distribution, Q3. The emails were between Diane and a private wealth manager. They discussed disbursements, asset protection strategies, and something referred to as temporary relocation. Rachel was copied on every message. I scanned the dates, months before she left. This wasn't an escape plan, it was a business plan. I photographed everything and returned the folder exactly as I'd found it. When Helen reviewed the documents the next day, she was quiet for a long moment. "They've been very careful," she said finally, "but not careful enough." She explained the next steps. Motions to compel disclosure, requests for forensic accounting, a petition to freeze not just the joint accounts, but any related entities benefiting from marital funds. "It won't be fast," she cautioned, "and it won't be dramatic." "That's fine," I said. "I'm not in a hurry." The first sign that our strategy was working came sooner than I expected. Rachel's lawyer requested a continuance on the custody hearing, cited scheduling conflicts. Helen smiled when she forwarded me the email. "They're regrouping," she said. "That means they're uncomfortable." A week later, another development. Lucas's company received a notice from the IRS requesting clarification on several transfers. Routine on paper, but timing matters, and pressure, even when subtle, has a way of spreading. Rachel called again. This time I answered. "Michael," she said, her voice strained but controlled. "Why are you doing this?" "Doing what I asked evenly." Dragging lawyers into everything she said. "We could have handled this privately." I glanced at the open file on my desk at the columns of numbers and dates that told a very different story. "You left with our money," I said. "You filed for custody. This is Private Rachel. Just documented. There was a pause. Lucas's accounts are being reviewed, she said. Did you know about that? I know a lot of things now, I replied. Her breath caught just slightly. Enough. Let's be reasonable, she said. This doesn't have to hurt everyone. I thought of Ethan coloring quietly in the next room, humming to himself. It already did, I said. You just weren't here to see it. I hung up before she could respond. Over the next few days, the tone shifted. Emails that once carried confidence now sounded cautious. Requests replaced demands. Proposals were floated, then retracted. Helen fielded everything, filtering out the noise and highlighting what mattered. They're testing you, she said, looking for desperation. They wouldn't find it. Instead, they found compliance. With the law, with process, with patience. The court granted our motion for a temporary asset freeze pending full disclosure. It wasn't everything trust moved slowly, shielded by layers of legality, but it was enough to disrupt the flow Rachel had come to rely on. That evening, I received a message from an unfamiliar number. This is Lucas. We should talk. I stared at the screen, then forwarded it to Helen. Her response was immediate. Do not engage. So I didn't. The next day, Diane showed up at my door. She stood on the porch, impeccably dressed, her expression composed but tight around the edges. We need to discuss what you're doing, she said. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. If you have something to say, you can put it in writing, I replied. Her eyes narrowed. You're hurting my daughter. I met her gaze. You helped her do this. She scoffed. You're imagining things. I thought of the emails, the trust, the careful choreography. I'm documenting things I said. There's a difference. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face. Be careful, she said quietly. People with power don't like being challenged. I nodded. Neither do people with children. She left without another word. That night, as I tucked Ethan into bed, he asked, Is Mom mad at you? I smoothed his blanket. Your mom is dealing with some things I said, but she loves you. He seemed satisfied with that, rolling onto his side. Children accept partial truths when they feel safe. As I turned off the light, my phone buzzed with a notification from Helen. We have confirmation. Funds tied to Lucas's LLC are frozen pending review. Miami is feeling very far away right now. I sat on the edge of the bed and let myself exhale. The counterattack had never been loud. No confrontations, no ultimatums. Just pressure applied in the right places. Rachel had believed Miami was a clean break. She was beginning to realize it was a fragile one. Miami announced itself through photographs long before it became a problem. Sunlit balconies, white linen curtains, water so blue it looked unreal. Rachel posted nothing publicly, but the evidence arrived anyway, filtered through lawyers' filings and the small tells people leave behind when they believe the ending is already written. The first sign was procedural. Helen called on a Tuesday morning, her voice measured but energized. They've requested a modification to the asset freeze, she said. They're claiming hardship. Hardship, I repeated. Yes, Helen replied, which means the freeze is working. Hardship as a concept had always belonged to other people in Rachel's vocabulary. She used it the way professionals do. Abstract, polite, meant to describe something unfortunate but distant. Now it had attached itself to her name. Over the next week, the tempo changed. Motions multiplied. Requests contradicted each other. Rachel's filings began to include explanations where there had once been assumptions. She claimed expenses she'd never mentioned before. Living costs, relocation fees, legal retainers. Lucas's name appeared more frequently, no longer as a neutral party, but as a financial necessity. Helen sent me copies of everything. Notice the inconsistency, she said. First she claims independence, then dependency. Courts noticed that. So did I. The next call came late after Ethan had gone to sleep. I almost didn't answer when I saw Rachel's number. Almost. Curiosity won. Michael, she said, and there was something raw in her voice I hadn't heard before. I need you to understand what's happening. I leaned back against the kitchen counter, staring at the quiet house. I understand plenty. Lucas's accounts are tied up, she said quickly. My access to the trust is limited right now. This wasn't supposed to happen. This, I said slowly, was always going to happen. She exhaled sharply. You're being vindictive. I thought of the ER hallway, of Ethan's small hand in mine. No, I said, I'm being accurate. Silence stretched between us, brittle and exposed. We can fix this, she said finally. If you stop pushing what I asked. The investigation, she said, the filings, the freeze. I glanced at the folder on the table, printouts, timelines, evidence stacked neatly. You filed first, I reminded her. You moved first. That was different, she said. I needed security. So did Ethan, I replied. So did I. Her voice softened, shifting tactics. I made a mistake, she said. Miami was a reaction. I didn't respond. Michael, she pressed. I'm going to let the process work, I said. That's all I can promise. She hung up without saying goodbye. 2 days later, Lucas's name appeared again, this time in an email forwarded by Helen. He'd been served with a subpoena, financial disclosures, testimony regarding commingled funds. His attorney requested an extension. Denied. Miami, it turned out, was a terrible place to hide once the light was directed properly. Rachel sent messages more frequently after that, none of them angry now. Concerned. Cooperative. She asked about Ethan, about school, about his health. She suggested video calls, then missed the scheduled times. When she did appear on screen, the background was always carefully neutral, a blank wall, no windows. Control even in collapse. Diane tried a different approach. Her email arrived on a Friday afternoon, written in a tone so measured it was almost elegant. Michael family survived by knowing when to de-escalate. Rachel's situation has become unstable. This benefits no one, especially Ethan. I forwarded it to Helen. Her response was a single line, interesting choice of words. That evening, as I helped Ethan with his homework, my phone buzzed again. A number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. The message was short. Michael, this is Lucas. We need to clear the air. Rachel's under a lot of pressure. I deleted it. Pressure, I thought, was what you felt when you were pinned by forces you couldn't charm or negotiate away. Pressure was the truth bearing down. The court hearing was set for the following week. Helen and I reviewed our presentation meticulously. We didn't dramatize, we didn't editorialize. We presented facts and let their weight speak. On the morning of the hearing, Rachel appeared via video. Her hair was pulled back tightly, makeup understated, posture rigid. She looked smaller than I remembered, as if the Miami sun hadn't reached her after all. The judge asked questions about funds, about timelines, about Ethan. Rachel answered carefully, but the gaps were there. When asked about the trust, she deferred to her mother. When asked about Lucas's involvement, she minimized. When asked why she'd requested jurisdiction in Florida while Ethan remained here, she faltered. Helen spoke last. She outlined the inconsistencies, the omissions, the patterns. She didn't accuse. She illuminated. By the end, the judge's expression had hardened. I am extending the asset freeze, he said. All related entities will comply. Jurisdiction remains here pending further review. Rachel's image froze for a split second, her composure cracking before the screen caught up. Afterward, Helen called me. That went well, she said. Not finished, but well. I sat in the car outside Ethan's school, engine idling, letting the results settle. Relief came slowly, cautious and incomplete. This wasn't victory, it was traction. That night, Rachel texted one last time. I didn't think it would end like this. I typed, then erased, typed again. It hasn't ended, I wrote. It's just honest now. She didn't reply. Later, after Ethan fell asleep, I stood in the backyard and looked up at the night sky. Somewhere, Rachel was staring at a very different view, one she'd believed would absolve her choices. Miami had promised escape, reinvention, a clean slate. Instead, it had given her exposure. The collapse wasn't loud, no headlines, no dramatic arrests, just doors closing quietly, accounts inaccessible, options narrowing. In the end, Miami didn't break her. It revealed her. The morning the court issued its final temporary orders, the house felt different, not lighter exactly, but steadier, as if the walls had stopped bracing for impact. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window while it brewed, watching Ethan's backpack sway gently where he dropped it the night before. Ordinary details had become my markers of progress. If the small things were still intact, so was the center. Helen called just after 9. Full physical custody to you, she said. Supervised visitation for Rachel contingent on compliance. Asset disclosures ordered in full. Trust distribution subject to review. Jurisdiction remains here. I closed my eyes, not from relief, but from the release of holding my breath for weeks without realizing it. Thank you, I said. You did the work, Helen replied. You stayed disciplined. After we hung up, I sat at the table and let the silence settle. There would be more hearings, more paperwork, consequences that unfolded slowly, methodically. Justice, I was learning, wasn't cinematic. It was cumulative. Rachel sent a message later that afternoon. It was brief. "I'll follow the order. I want what's best for Ethan." I read it twice, then placed the phone face down. Wanting and doing were not the same thing. Not anymore. Diane didn't write again. Her absence felt intentional, strategic. Power recalibrates itself when leverage disappears. I didn't take it personally. That evening, I picked Ethan up from school. He ran toward me, backpack bouncing, grin wide. Guess what he said? "We're learning about planets." "Which one's your favorite?" I asked. "Saturn," he said without hesitation. "Because it has rings. It looks like it's protected." Protected. I smiled and buckled him into the car. Life resumed its quieter rhythms. Homework at the table, dinner together, weekend errands. The case remained present, a low hum in the background, but it no longer dominated the room. What dominated now was the work of being here, of showing up without the constant intrusion of fear. A month later, the forensic accounting report arrived. It was thicker than I expected, dense with tables and annotations. Helen summarized it over the phone. "The trust was used to supplement household expenses," she said, "which means it's marital. The offshore entities were leveraged improperly. Lucas has exposure. Rachel's position has weakened significantly." "And Ethan?" I asked. "Ethan is